Well, let me take a second to welcome our guests. We have the director of the film, David Burke, and the subject of the film, Dr. Phil Kennedy. So, thank you guys so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
We have a iPad set up right here at the front staircase. This will allow everybody to ask their questions directly to the filmmaker and subject of the film as well. So feel free to start lining up for your questions there. It is the only way they will be able to hear you, is to talk directly to actually this microphone, which will pass back out there as well. But I would like to just start by thanking you both for joining us. And I would like to pose a question first to the director of the film and then one to Dr. Kennedy. David, I guess this is the obvious question is this is clearly an incredible story. It's had a lot of coverage over the decades. But what brought you on board to approach Dr. Kennedy about actually telling this in documentary format?
There's a number of reasons, really. Basically, if you go into a bookstore, if you look at all the books about neuroscience, they're like, I'm one of the people that read those books. So I have an interest in kind of, neuroscience and psychology, like at an amateur level. So I was interested in doing something in this field. I just didn't know what. So I basically researched the area, went looking for different stories. I was just over a couple of months, I was just looking and researching, seeing what was out there. And then I came across Phil's story and I immediately knew that this was the one I wanted to do. I just kind of had that aha, eureka moment, or whatever you want to call it. But I just knew I just had a little bit more than just, it wasn't just a straight neuroscience story. There's a lot more to it. So I was immediately hooked. And we just started talking. I emailed Phil, I got in touch, and I think it's kind of people like Phil, it's kind of in their nature to be open for new ideas. So yeah, and he was interested in doing it. So we just started talking, we started, bouncing ideas back and forth, and that's where it started. And I always say as well, one of the things the icing on the cake was that Phil, where he grew up, you mentioned, he saw it in the documentary, he grew up in a town called Limerick. Like, that's literally 20 minutes drive from where I'm sitting now. So it was like, I just, at the very least, I got to try reach out to this guy. So that's how it started.
So did you find any issues talking to Dr. Kennedy about this, getting him to open up on the subject?
No, the complete opposite. Phil just, I wouldn't say he's no filter, but I mean, Phil, if you ask Phil a straight question, he'll give you a straight answer. You know what I mean? And I think before we actually got to that point, I think I hopefully maybe built up trust with Phil, that he knew that I was credible, he knew that I was trustworthy, that I think if Phil had got the impression that I wasn't any of those things, I don't think he would have wasted his time in the first place. But no, when we got to the point where we were actually in production, no, I mean, Phil, I think everyone was on the same page, including all the team that worked with. We were all just basically trying to make the best job that we could, and obviously Phil was part of that.
Well, it's an incredible story. I got to see it at the premiere at Tribeca, and it's been with me ever since. One of the questions, and this I would like to bring to Dr. Kennedy, and then we'll open up to the audience, is something that rewatching the movie again was kind of my immediate thought the first time I saw the film, which is that it starts with this idea where it talks about using the technology for locked-in syndrome, for ALS, for the communications, which I think a lot of audience have at least some basic understanding of, being that Dr. Hawking had been such a presence over the decades in that respect. But what it brings up is this idea of the typewriter and, being created for a blind woman, and then that technology becoming part of everybody's everyday life. I mean, there's nobody essentially that does not use a keypad to essentially do anything almost anymore. And then the film, as you follow the journey, looks to the future of this. And so the question I actually have for you, Dr. Kennedy, is primarily that your focus is transmitting information from the brain to an outside source for communication. But I'm very curious about the idea of jacking in, or the idea of that hacking the brain, where the information is theoretically transported from an outside source to yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me here. I appreciate that. And I certainly appreciate that question. It's a very important one, but people other research is already doing that. For example, stimulating the sensory cortex to receive information from the sensory information from the rest of the body when they're trying to develop a motor prosthetic. Because you have to have the sense of feeling of knowing where your body is or knowing what a prosthetic arm is before you can stimulate it. But that's not really your question. Your question is it more like as you use the term jacked in, which if I remember was a term from one of these, from the Matrix. They use that term. Is that possible? Yeah, I'm afraid so. It is. It's kind of scary, but it is. But the question is really, what do you jack into? I gave you the example of stimulating the sensory area. But what do you jack into, people? We don't know that. So it's still just an idea. But, you've got better people than me chasing down that idea. And let's see what happens.
Well, I think that's something that the film addresses or just touches on just a little bit, which is the idea that some of the financing for the research comes from government entity and from private business interests. And naturally, that's where the question that you bring up in the film, is this technology used for good or evil, becomes like a phenomenally interesting moral quandary, because I imagine most of us don't think government and business interests necessarily are altruistic.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, it's a really important question. It hinges on, well, what do you do with the information, with the technology? Exactly what do you do? And, we talked about this before, at least I wrote about it, that sometimes you can imagine that a private group or a government group could develop this superhuman super warriors, and that would be hugely, hugely wrong. Now, the answer to that is very simple. It's that everybody should be able to avail of this technology. And it's before, like you have your cell phone. Originally, 20 years ago, they were very big, bulky, and very expensive. But now, find somebody who doesn't have a cell phone. It's the same thing. The cost will come down. In fact, we're working on bringing the cost down, but it will come down, and it should be available to everybody. To me, that's the only answer to nefarious governments and private enterprises that want to, corral this technology and use it for their nefarious interests.
Essentially democratize the entire thing by bringing it down to the cost of a cell phone. So,
yeah.
I love that. Well, there's a huge line, so I actually want these people to have a
okay.
So I'm going to pass this mic over so that they can talk to you guys, and I'll be back at the end.
Okay.
Dr. Kennedy, let me start with a thank you for your pioneering technology. Am I coming through okay? All right.
Thank you very much.
Direct question, the funding status. I would think Elon Musk would have you on speed dial by now. What's the status with your funding? And if you were to get unlimited funding, what would be the first thing you would do?
Well, my status, my funding, yes, I wish Elon Musk would fund me. Sure. I'm making some approaches to that, but my technology is different from everybody else's, and so there's probably a kind of reticent to actually use my technology. But my technology has persisted for over a decade in Eric, the patient you saw in the documentary. So if I had unlimited funding, I would just keep doing what I'm doing, which is to help people who are mute and paralyzed, but still have a viable motor speech cortex, and help them to speak, get them speaking again. That's what I would do. And that takes a while. I have other plans to do the same for motor control, but it's a long, hard road. And I certainly do need the funding. There's very little right now, because we're not at the research stage anymore. We're at the development and application stage. And that's always hard to get funding for that. I've had $4.5 million from the NIH over the years, but they're not interested in actually doing the actual application, that is implanting in patients. So that's where I am with the funding right now. And we actually set up a Silent Speech Foundation. If anybody wants to, silencespeechfoundation.org, I think. there's a website where people can donate, and that'd be great if people did. Even $10, $100, it all adds up, because we do need a lot of money. No question about that. So, thank you for that question.
Oh yeah. I need a little light on my face. Maybe it cuts off there. That's where the camera attaches. Hello, Dr. Kennedy. I study computer engineering. I'm a grad student right now, and I have a bit of experience taking a few courses on machine learning. I don't want to get too technical for our audience here, but is that the basis of your work, or does it intersect, or because I know we do have specific for speaker recognition, we do have specific encodings where we use machine learning to develop these encodings without knowing what the encodings are going to be in advance, and we have ways of reading those into words. Does that come into your research?
Okay, that's a very, very interesting question, because in fact we will be using machine learning. Right now, what we're doing is looking at the firing rates of single units, and they form a pattern for different phonemes, words, and phrases. So we detect that pattern, and the easy way to detect that is using MATLAB's programs. They have different programs for recognizing those patterns, and that's what I've used. And that's what I've shown, that you can detect speech even in somebody who can't actually speak, but they do have viable signals in their motor cortex, which is just above the left ear in people who are right-handed. So you just implant that area. And yes, indeed, we have a company from Israel, and they're interested. Dan Furman is the CEO, and they're interested in using machine learning to, help decoding, because you've got to decode within 200 milliseconds. And if you don't do it within that quickly, then it's going to sound like an echo. And that's these are all kind of restrictions we have. But yes, we do have plans to use machine learning. And if you want to volunteer, that's great.
Where do I sign up?
Just email me or text me. Sure.
I'll make it. Thank you for your time.
Sure, you're welcome.
Hi there, Dr. Kennedy. This might overlap a little bit with the previous question, but I noticed in the documentary, it looked like with your first patient there, I think his name was JR, he was controlling a cursor on a screen to select letters off of a keyboard in order to type, it seemed like. And then with the second patient that was shown, Eric, it seemed that the videos of experiments that were being done showed him more working with phonemes to actually create sounds with his father, saying like da noises, and then him trying to recreate those noises. Was that the case where with the second patient, he was trying to speak directly from his brain to just actual audio without letters being used as characters? And then has that happened with other patients down the line or with your own implant at all?
Okay, so if I get your question, the second patient, you mean Eric, the one you saw?
Yes.
I was the other patient. Okay, so what we did with Eric was that we try to recognize the phonemes, which we succeeded in doing. Even though we'd only one double electrode in there, we still were able to detect about 23 of the 39 English phonemes. And then when I did that on myself, we had 3 electrodes in 3 different areas, which was basically almost covering the whole speech area on the left side. And we were able to detect over 30, about 32 of the 39 phonemes. And then we did the same for words. So that's basically what we did in that study, to show that we could detect silent speech, we call it.
Perfect.
Does that answer your question? You had a very long question that I
sorry, I kind of rambled there. That definitely answers it. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. So obviously, sorry.
Okay.
Obviously, a lot of your research focuses on sort of reconnecting speech and helping to establish communication with people. And I know that you've talked about it's in the stage of potentially transmitting data to the brain. But at one point you mentioned potentially reconnecting like lost connections in the human brain, of allowing somebody who's, paralyzed to potentially move again. How far off do you think that is technology-wise?
Well, that's not that far off. Other groups have done that. They have different kinds of electrodes, and they have restored movement, like controlling a robotic arm, controlling a paralyzed limb. There's several groups doing that. I think of Andy Schwartz, Lee Hochberg, Anderson, and Bouchon. And so that's underway right now. And a guy called Professor Lee, he's working on the sensory return to the brain. So you stimulate the sensory cortex, that's connected to the motor cortex, and then you record from the motor cortex to drive the limb. So that all that research is actually underway. So that's good news.
Wow, yeah, I didn't realize it was that close. Yeah, I'll do some research into those people. All right, thank you.
Pardon me?
I said I'll look those people up. Thank you.
Thank you. David, I hope they have a question for you.
First, I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, for coming out today. This is great. A question for actually both of you. I draw inspiration watching other people do great things, and you guys are both on the high echelon of what you do. The film-wise, seeing something that's produced real well and that's entertaining to watch and is visually stunning to watch. I imagine going through that process, there's a lot of roadblocks, a lot of no's, trying to overcome those objectives. And then with you, Doctor, I can only imagine through your years of research how many roadblocks you've come, how many people that told you no. Each of you gentlemen, what did you guys find inspiration to keep going and saying no to the people that say no, and that kept that ball rolling for you guys?
I'll go first. I was actually nice and relaxed there. I was letting Phil do all the hard work. Yeah, you're right. I think if you think about it, like a lot of the documentaries that are popular at the moment, they're about certain sports stars or certain, people that are famous in popular culture. So it's kind of, when you're trying to do something that's a little bit different, it's, I wouldn't say roadblocks, but you have to kind of, you have to give yourself an advantage. So it's kind of, you have advantages and disadvantages. The advantage that we had with this project was that it stood out because it was completely different from anything else anyone was pitching at the time. I would say that I think the fact that this subject matter, say Facebook were, if they're researching it, Elon Musk was researching it. So I use that basically as a platform to kind of pitch this, that this is a hot topic. Like, you gotta move on this, like, you know what I mean? And because I was able to get funding from Ireland, we had funding from Screen Ireland, which is kind of the film board there. And we also got Science Foundation Ireland, they came on board as well. And like, I was able to say, well, we've got this pioneering Irish neuroscientist. I mean, you know what I mean? You've got to, this is a no-brainer for everyone, let's work together. So that was kind of how I pitched it. But you're right, we were still a little bit short, and you do come up with roadblocks. Like, say, there was certain channels in Europe I thought they would have been interested, and what we were told was that basically, is it a science documentary or is it a biography? Because for all their strands, they either want straight science or a straight biography, and it was kind of caught in between the two. But we were lucky, we got funding from the Sloan Foundation in the States, and that was just a game changer. Then we were up and running. But I think, to answer your question, I think what I did was I pitched the way I mentioned, and I had lots of different spinning plates because I knew some were going to crash. So just give yourself the best chance possible. So I hope that kind of goes some ways to answering my part of the question anyway.
That's perfect. And same for you, Doctor. Where did you draw inspiration to keep going and keep going?
Just in one word, patience. If you see somebody paralyzed, they can't speak, they can't move, they have normal sensation, they can't even scratch an itch, they can't speak, and they need to be attended 24 hours a day. And the tragedy of ALS is that everybody says it's fatal. Well, it isn't. If you look at Stephen Hawking, he took a ventilator and he lived a very productive life for 50 years. So to me, these are inspirational. And I've seen patients over the years, and they just, and you're right, because, you don't get funded, you don't get this, something goes wrong, but you just have to keep going. I mean, persistence pays off in the end. And we're still going. We're still trying to raise funds and keep on going and implant more patients. And we'll just keep on keeping on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm back again.
Hi.
I have a bit of a fantastic question for or not like in terms of fantasy. So humans and computers have coexisted separately outside of our fingertips for about like 60, 70 years now. And as a result of that, they've become rather different. We don't, as far as I know, I don't have a file in my brain. Do you think as we get closer into having this commercial widespread computer brain interface, do you think that things like abstract file systems is something that you would see win over the traditional system of human memory? Like maybe it comes to you, maybe it doesn't. And have you sort of considered, I don't know, maybe a long-term thing like this? Like what do you envision as one of the founding members of this study field?
Well, I think I know what you're getting at. Okay. Basically, we'll be able to access the cloud. So if you imagine yourself kind of like a cell phone, where you can access the cloud and store information up there, get information from the cloud, do advanced calculations on the cloud, and use that. So in a sense, you're expanding your brain. You're expanding the memory banks of your brain. You expand the calculation ability of your brain. It won't necessarily give you any wisdom or make you any smarter, but it will give you that huge advantage. And I do really see that happening. So I think that answers your question. I don't see where we would implant memories in the brain because we don't know anything about memories, very little about memories. We wouldn't know where to start. But we do see that if we can communicate to some external memory bank, which we call the clouds, it's really just a set of computers in somebody's computer farm. Okay.
It does belong to somebody in the end.
Sorry?
It does belong to somebody in the end. The cloud, whether it be Amazon, AWS, or something like that, it does belong to somebody else.
It does. I know what you're getting at. The privacy question and manipulating the knowledge. So we need other computer farms elsewhere that are not beholden to some commercial interest. And I agree with you on that. I presume that's what you're getting.
In my hands, personally.
Okay.
Well, sorry, just to kind of when I was researching this way back a couple of years ago, there's something interesting. What your question is really of the time now, but in some ways it's not on your question at all. If you go way back, there was a story about Socrates. And when writing came in, he was actually really freaked out about writing. He thought that this is going to affect my memory. And in some ways, he was actually right if you think about it, because he was putting, before he had everything in his head, they used parables to be passed down through poems and stuff like that. But then what he did was, when writing came along, it was basically cognitive offloading. You're putting all your thoughts on the paper, and that's where your memory is now. So in some ways, you have to weigh it up. Like in some ways, Socrates was right, because writing did affect his memory, because he was offloading his thoughts and ideas on the paper. But in other ways, it was a great benefit to mankind. So there is, it's never black and white. And there is research done, I think, in, it'll come to me in a second, I think it's Tulane University. And what they found was, like, again, what's creativity? Like, where does an idea come from? We don't even know what a thought is yet. But there's a good likelihood that creativity is linked to memory. And if we're offloading all our memories onto something external, are we going to be less creative? Are we going to be less intuitive? So that could be one of these unexpected consequences, but we don't know. But it is possible, and that's what some of their early research led them to think that. So the future will, who knows? There will be unexpected consequences. That's the only thing I think that we can guarantee.
But David, I'm hoping that we'll expand our memory, not destroy the memories we have. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So in fact,
you use that whatever bandwidth for something else. I get it. Yeah.
So we might be more creative. You never know.
Maybe, yeah, true.
And then there's the
This
thing
is the
of
expert, not me.
if you're directly expanding your brain, I imagine would be treating a computer you're interfacing with as an external lobe. I imagine you'd probably have to do some major decisions on whether you're actually communicating with that or if it is actively tied to everything else. So like you said, there's a scene in the film where you compared unspoken speech to spoken speech, and there was very, very little indifference. I imagine that whatever goes on in the brain to consent to broadcasting a thought is an important thing to put into something like this, into a future interface.
I agree.
I'm going to hand this over real soon.
Okay.
I don't want to monopolize the time.
Interesting questions.
Hi, doctor. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on the differences in data integrity and potential going forward for implants versus the non-invasive cap type.
Okay, so you're saying implants versus non-implants. That's certainly topics that are being explored right now. There's I actually wrote a summary paper on it published a few years ago. And the point about the implants is higher resolution, so higher bandwidth, because you're getting at the individual single units. And the people who do the non-implant EEG or just lie on the surface, they don't have that resolution, but they don't need it for many of these prosthetics. So in other words, if you're trying to restore speech or fine finger movements, you need the higher bandwidth that single unit recording gives you. So it's task dependent. What prosthetic you're trying to develop will determine whether you should be external, non-invasive, or should be invasive. And the same goes for people thinking of just driving video games. And they're using EEG signals to do that. And that's fine. But again, it's bandwidth that's the issue.
Thank you.
That makes sense? Okay.
Hi. So, first, I have some experience with ALS. I lost a friend recently, and have another who's in late stages of it. So I think that's a very admirable goal, and thank you for focusing on that. I like that one. I had somewhat of the same question, and as you were speaking, answering other questions, I realized that one of the limitations, because it seems to me that a lot of the criticism of your work has probably been due to the invasive aspect of the implants. You spoke about resolution in terms of decoding signals from the brain, but I would think a more critical limitation would be that you can't stimulate the brain without implants, that there would be serious challenges there. Is that correct?
Sorry, serious challenges in stimulating the brain?
Stimulating the brain, yes. So if you want to, you talked about injecting information into, say, the visual cortex, things like that you can't really do that without implants.
Sorry, you're fading away. I think you should bring the microphone up.
Okay. All right. Is that better?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Okay. So you can't stimulate the brain. You can receive information from the brain with remote sensing, a cap, something like that, electrodes, but you can't stimulate the brain without an implanted electrode, correct? Not effective.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. And so people are doing that, sure. Not just the sensory cortex, but you mentioned the visual cortex. There are visual prosthetics as well.
Yeah.
And there'll be I'm not sure about auditory prosthetics, but it's actually the electrode construction is easier. You can use those that you use for receiving, and you can stimulate through them. Problem with stimulating electrodes is that eventually they fade out, they get damaged, and stimulus is too widespread, etc. So it has its problems too. Like you mentioned, it's a little more difficult.
Do you think there's any
promise in stimulation from an external device without using implantable electrodes?
You can use ultrasound that's triangulated, and at the point you've got you can have a stimulus, but that's so bulky. I don't really see it at the moment anyway without having to implant in some fashion.
And could I ask a question that may be a little bit personal? Any long-term
Sure.
effects from the electrodes implanted in yourself?
No, none at all. No, I got them implanted in 2014, and there were some side effects after I got implanted. Yeah,
Wow.
but after that, once all that cleared up, I've been fine. I had a problem with speech and writing afterwards, and that the speech problem lasted for about a month, and then it didn't really clear up for several months. But that was no big deal. Now, as you can see, I can speak, thankfully. So the brain is very, very resilient, and it. But I wouldn't want to do it again. Okay, once is enough.
Well, thank you for your dedication, and thank you for making the film.
Thank you.
Gonna try not to fall down because I'm running to the stage. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for coming out. It's absolutely wonderful to have a chance to play this on the big screen. I want to take a moment just to thank David, Dr. Kennedy, again for joining us. Dr. Kennedy, you mentioned a website that they could keep an eye at and where you're doing some fundraising. So if you maybe could reiterate that one more time just before we wrap up.
Yeah, it's www.silencespeech.org. You can also just go on my name, or you can go to neuralsignals.com. But I appreciate donation at silencespeech.org. So thank you very much for asking me to present those websites.
No, absolutely. And David, I know Cargo is handling the release of the film, but could you tell us maybe if you know if there are any plans for it to get kind of mass released VOD or anything, or where they might keep an eye out for passing this on to their friends?
Yeah, I think we'll be doing a VOD later in the year. I think they're doing TV sales at the moment, but it will be available VOD at some point, probably maybe late spring or something like that. We haven't it pinned in the diary yet, but yeah, it will be available nationally at some stage for sure.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Incredible. Really appreciate it. Thank you all as well. Have an incredible, wonderful day, and be well.
Thank you very much. All the best. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.